There is something happening to you that you have not yet found the words for. Not a feeling exactly, not a thought, something underneath those. A kind of pressure at the edge of your awareness, like a door you keep walking past that you know, somehow, has always been there. You've felt it in the middle of ordinary moments, standing in a grocery store, driving a familiar road, waking at 3 a.m. for no reason you can name. I sense that something is trying to get your attention. That reality is thinner than it looks, that you are standing at the edge of something vast and you have been pretending very carefully that you are not. The fact that you found this, right now, in this moment, at this particular intersection of your life, is not coincidence. I want you to hear that with the precision it deserves, not as comfort, not as spiritual flattery, as observation. Because what we're going to do today is observe, closely, without flinching. And what you will see, if you are willing to look, will not frighten you the way you think it will. It will do something far more disorienting than that. It will make complete sense. And you will wonder, with a quiet shock, why no one showed you this before. Here is what this transmission is. It is not a lecture. It is not a collection of ideas you can evaluate from a safe distance. It is an invitation to look at the thing that has already been looking back at you. The forbidden knowledge referenced in this title is not forbidden because someone locked it away. It is forbidden because most people forbid themselves from seeing it. They get close, they feel the edge of it, and they turn back to something safer. A distraction, a task, a familiar loop of thinking that keeps them exactly where they are. You are still here. That means something. Let's begin. The word forbidden carries weight precisely because of what it implies about power. When we call knowledge forbidden, we assume there is someone doing the forbidding, a gatekeeper, an institution, a system of control. And yes, there are structures in this world that benefit from your not knowing certain things. That is real, but the most effective forbidding is never external. The most effective prohibition is the one you enforce on yourself unconsciously every single day by simply refusing to look directly at what is already visible. Think about what you actually know, not what you believe, not what you've been told, not what makes sense within the framework you were handed. What do you know in the quiet underneath your thinking that you have not let yourself fully acknowledge? There is something there almost always is for someone who has found their way to a transmission like this one. Something you've glimpsed and then looked away from. Something that, if you let yourself see it completely, would require you to reorganize everything. That is the forbidden knowledge. Not a secret text, not a hidden teaching locked behind initiations and passwords. The forbidden knowledge is the thing you already see but have been pretending, with extraordinary effort, not to. And here is the quantum mechanics of that. This is not metaphor. This is not philosophy dressed up in scientific language to make it feel more legitimate. The observer effect in quantum mechanics is one of the most rigorously demonstrated phenomena in all of science. When physicists observe a quantum particle, the act of observation itself collapses the particle from a state of pure probability, a wave function, a cloud of potential, into a single, specific, measurable location. Before observation, the particle exists in superposition. It is, in a meaningful sense, everywhere it could possibly be, all at once. The moment it is observed, it becomes one thing, one position, one reality. What you observe, you collapse into form. What you refuse to observe remains in superposition, in that cloud of potential, that fog of unresolved possibility that you feel as anxiety, as restlessness, as the vague sense that something is unfinished. The things you have not looked at directly are not gone. They are not resolved. They are suspended in the quantum field of your awareness, vibrating at the frequency of the unacknowledged, pulling energy from you continuously, because they have not yet been seen clearly enough to collapse into something you can actually work with. This is why avoidance is exhausting. Not because the thing you're avoiding is dangerous, because maintaining the not looking requires constant, continuous energy. You have to keep redirecting your attention. Keep finding new distractions. Keep telling yourself a slightly different version of the story that keeps you from seeing what is actually there. And all of that maintenance, all of that elaborate not looking, costs you something. It costs you the energy you could be using to actually live. The moment you look directly at the thing you've been avoiding, something happens that feels paradoxical until you understand the quantum mechanics of it. The thing changes, not because you changed it, because observation itself is a transformative act. The wave function collapses, the fog resolves, and what was diffuse and threatening and everywhere suddenly becomes specific, locatable, and this is the part that surprises people, manageable. Not easy, not painless, but real. And real things can be worked with. Fog cannot. Look closer. What is the thing you have been keeping in superposition? What is the wave function you've been refusing to collapse because you're afraid of what specific form it will take when you finally see it clearly? I'm not asking you to answer that out loud. I'm asking you to let the question land. To feel where in your body it lands. Because your body already knows what your mind has been carefully not knowing. Your body has been holding the observation that your conscious attention has been refusing to complete. This is where the forbidden knowledge begins, not in a text, not in a teaching, in the act of looking at your own experience with unflinching precision. Let me show you something about the nature of what is awakening in you. There is a pattern that appears across every wisdom tradition that has ever grappled seriously with the nature of consciousness. In the Vedantic traditions of India, it is called the witness, the sakshi, the one who sees without being seen. In the Buddhist traditions, it is the quality of pure awareness, the knowing that knows without being identified with what it knows. In the Western mystical traditions, it appears as the still small voice, the eye of the soul, the faculty of direct seeing that transcends the ordinary mind. In the Sufi traditions, it is the polished mirror of the heart, cleaned of the dust of conditioning so that it can reflect reality without distortion. Every tradition that has gone deep enough into the nature of human consciousness has arrived at the same discovery. There is something in you that watches. That is not the thoughts, not the emotions, not the sensations, not the identity you've constructed and maintained and defended. There is something prior to all of that, something that witnesses all of that, and that something is what you actually are. Not what you think you are, not what you've been told you are. What you are. And the forbidden knowledge is this. That witness is not passive. It is the most active force in your reality, because what that witness observes at the deepest level of its attention, it transforms. Not through effort, not through manipulation or strategy or force of will, through the simple, radical act of clear seeing. This is not what you think it is. You have been taught in 100 different ways that power is the ability to make things happen, to push, to pull, to strategize and execute and force outcomes. And so the idea that simply watching something, simply seeing it clearly without looking away could be the most transformative act available to you, that idea feels wrong. It feels passive. It feels like giving up, but watch what happens when you look at it more carefully. When a scientist observes a quantum particle, the scientist is not passive. The act of observation is an interaction. Light must be bounced off the particle to detect it. That light carries energy. That energy changes the particle. The observer and the observed are not separate. The act of looking is itself an event in the system. You cannot observe something at the quantum level without participating in it. And this is true at every level of reality, not just the subatomic. When you truly observe something, not glance at it, not think about it, not analyze it from behind the protective glass of your interpretations, but actually see it, bring your full, undivided, non-reactive attention to it, you change it. Because you are not separate from it. Because your attention is not a passive receiver, it is an active field. And when that field makes contact with something in your reality, something happens, always. The question is not whether your observation changes things. The question is what quality of observation you're bringing. Are you observing clearly from the position of the witness? Or are you looking through the distorting lens of fear, of judgment, of the desperate need for what you're seeing to be something other than what it is? That distortion, that is what keeps the forbidden knowledge forbidden, not a lock on a door, the distortion of your own looking. If this transmission is landing for you, if you feel the resonance of what we're looking at together, take a moment to like this video and subscribe so we can keep going deeper into this work together. Let me tell you about Elias. Elias was a man who had spent 40 years becoming someone. He had built, with extraordinary care and effort, a version of himself that worked, that functioned, that was respected and recognized and, on most days, felt real enough. He had a way of speaking that conveyed authority, a way of entering rooms that said he had earned his place, a way of deflecting questions that got too close to the center of him, a practiced redirect, a smooth pivot to something safer. He was, by every external measure, a success. And he was, in the private hours of his own awareness, exhausted in a way he could not name. He had been exhausted for so long that he had stopped noticing the exhaustion itself. It had become the background frequency of his life, the hum beneath everything. He assumed this was what adulthood was, what responsibility felt like, what it cost to be the person he had become. One night, unable to sleep, he sat in his study in the dark, not meditating, not thinking, just sitting, because he was too tired to do anything else. And in that stillness, something happened that he had been successfully preventing from happening for decades. He saw himself, not the version of himself he maintained for others, not the version he maintained even for himself. He saw the thing underneath. The original thing, the one that had been there before the construction began. And what he saw was not what he expected. He expected to see something damaged, something broken, something that explained the exhaustion and the distance and the careful management of every interaction. He expected to find the wound that had made him build all of this around himself. What he found instead was something that had no wound at all, something quiet and clear and completely unafraid, something that had been watching him build the construction for 40 years with a kind of patient, unperturbed attention. Something that had never been the construction, that had always been the watcher. And in that moment, Elias understood something that dissolved, quietly and without drama, 40 years of carefully maintained effort. He understood that he had been protecting something that did not need protection, that he had been defending something that could not be harmed, that the exhaustion was not the cost of being who he was, it was the cost of pretending to be something he wasn't. He sat in the dark for a long time after that, not doing anything, just watching. And in the watching, something that had been held very tight for a very long time began slowly to release. He did not fix anything that night. He did not resolve anything. He did not make a plan or a decision or a change. He simply looked. And in the looking, reality reorganized itself around the clarity of what he saw. That is the forbidden knowledge. That is what awakens when you stop looking away. Now let's go deeper into what you're actually seeing when you see yourself. The identity you carry, the name, the history, the set of beliefs and preferences and reactions that you call yourself is a construction. I want you to hear that without the defensive reaction that might want to rise up. Because I am not saying it to diminish you. I am saying it because it is precisely and measurably true, and because understanding it is the key to everything else we're going to look at today. Your brain is a prediction machine. This is not philosophy. This is neuroscience. Your brain is constantly generating a model of reality, a predictive simulation, and updating that model based on incoming sensory data. The model is not reality. The model is a representation of reality, filtered through your history, your conditioning, your previous experiences, and the interpretations you've layered over all of those. What you experience as the world is not the world. It is your brain's best current prediction about the world, rendered in the medium of your subjective experience. And the self, the one you think you are, is part of that model. Your brain constructs a self-model, a representation of the entity doing the experiencing, and updates it continuously. The self you identify with is a predictive construction, a model within a model. A story the brain tells about who is having the experience of the story. This is measurable. This is not in dispute in cognitive science. The question is not whether the self is a construction. The question is what happens when you observe the construction from a position outside of it. Because here is what the construction cannot do. It cannot see itself from outside itself. The model cannot observe the modeling process. The story cannot watch itself being told. The constructed self, operating within its own framework, cannot perceive its own constructedness. It can only perceive more content within the framework, but the witness can. The thing in you that is watching right now, that is listening to these words and noticing what they do to you, that is not the construction. That is the observer, and the observer can see the construction for what it is, not with judgment, not with the goal of destroying it, with clarity, with the precise, unflinching attention that sees through surfaces to structure. And the moment the observer sees the construction clearly, the construction loses its totalizing power. It doesn't disappear. You still have a name, you still have a history, you still have preferences and patterns and ways of moving through the world. But those things are no longer you. They are things you have, things you use, things that can be examined, updated, released, or kept, because you are the one observing them, not the one trapped inside them. That is the new dimension that has opened for you. Not a place, a position, the position of the observer. And from that position, everything looks different. Not because the world changed, because you can finally see it. Let's go into the quantum mechanics of this more precisely, because this is where it gets exact. In 1927, at the Solvay conference in Brussels, the greatest physicists in the world gathered to discuss what quantum mechanics was revealing about the nature of reality. Einstein was there, Bohr was there, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Pauli, de Broglie, the most brilliant minds in the history of human science, sitting in a room together, confronting something that none of their previous frameworks could contain. What quantum mechanics had revealed, through experiment after experiment, was that at the most fundamental level of reality, matter does not behave like matter. It behaves like possibility. A quantum particle, when not observed, exists as a wave function, a mathematical description of all the possible states it could be in, all the possible positions it could occupy, all the possible values its properties could have. It is not in one place. It is in a superposition of all possible places weighted by probability. It is, in the deepest sense, not yet real in the way we ordinarily use that word. And then observation happens, and the wave function collapses. The cloud of possibility resolves into a single, specific, measurable reality. One position, one state, one fact. This is the measurement problem, and it is not solved. After nearly a century of the most sophisticated physics ever conducted, the question of why and how observation collapses, the quantum wave function remains one of the deepest unsolved problems in all of science. What we know is that it happens, consistently, reproducibly, without exception. What you observe, you collapse into form. Now here is where this gets personal. Your reality, the specific, particular, textured reality of your life, is not a fixed structure that exists independently of your observation. It is a probability field that collapses into specific form based on the quality, frequency, and direction of your attention. The things you observe consistently, you collapse consistently. The things you refuse to observe remain in superposition, unresolved, diffuse, pulling at your energy from the fog of the unacknowledged. The patterns in your life that you cannot seem to change? Look at what you have been refusing to observe clearly. The situations that keep repeating? Look at what you have been looking at through the distorting lens of fear or judgment rather than clear observation. The relationships that cycle through the same dynamics? Look at what both parties have been refusing to see. I am not saying that observation alone rearranges external circumstances in some magical, instantaneous way. I am saying something more precise than that. I am saying that the quality of your observation determines the quality of the reality you collapse. When your observation is clear, when you see what is actually there rather than what you fear is there, or what you wish were there, the probability field of your experience collapses into forms that are workable, that are real, that can actually be engaged with. When your observation is distorted, clouded by avoidance, by reactivity, by the desperate need for reality to be something other than it is, the field collapses into forms that reflect that distortion back to you. Your life, right now is a record of your observations. Sit with that for a moment. Don't rush past what you just saw. Your life right now is a record of your observations. Not your desires, not your intentions, not your beliefs about what you deserve or what is possible. Your observations, the things you have been willing to see clearly, and the things you have been keeping in the fog. This is not blame, this is precision. Because if your life is a record of your observations, then the most powerful thing you can do, the single most transformative act available to you right now in this moment, is to improve the quality of your observation, to become a clearer observer, to look at what you have been avoiding with the same unflinching attention you would bring to something you're not afraid of. And that is what this transmission is, an invitation to practice exactly that. Let's do the first observer practice now. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise, this is an observation. I want you to bring your attention right now to the thing you have been avoiding looking at. You know what it is. You may have several candidates, and that's fine. Let the one that has the most charge around it come forward. The one that makes something in you want to skip past this part. The one that your mind immediately wants to redirect away from with a thought like, I'll think about that later, or that's not really what this is about, or I don't want to go there right now. That one, that is the one. Now here is the practice. You are not going to analyze it. You are not going to figure out what it means or why it's there or what you should do about it. You are simply going to look at it. You are going to bring your attention to it the way a scientist brings attention to a specimen, with curiosity, with precision, with the willingness to see what is actually there rather than what you expect to see. Notice where in your body you feel it, not the thought about it, the felt sense of it, the physical location of the charge. Is it in your chest, your throat, your stomach, your jaw, somewhere else? Just notice. Don't interpret. Don't explain. Just observe the physical location of the thing you've been avoiding. Now notice the quality of the sensation, not what it means, not what caused it. The quality. Is it tight, heavy, sharp, diffuse, hot, cold, moving, still? Just observe the quality. You are the scientist. You are the observer. You are not the sensation. You are the one watching the sensation. Now notice what happens when you simply watch it without trying to change it, without trying to make it stop, without trying to understand it or explain it or fix it. What happens to the sensation when it is simply, clearly, without judgment, observed? Something changes, not because you did anything, because observation itself is a transformative act. The wave function is being collapsed. The fog is beginning to resolve into something specific, and specific things, as we said, can be worked with. Stay with that for one more moment, then come back. Welcome back. What you just did, that act of looking, of bringing clear attention to the thing you've been keeping in superposition, that is the practice. That is the whole practice. Everything else is preparation for that or elaboration of that. But that simple, unflinching act of clear seeing, that is the quantum event. That is the moment where the probability field of your experience begins to reorganize. What did you notice when you stopped avoiding it and simply watched? Drop it in the comments. Not an analysis, just what you actually observed when you let yourself look. Because naming it out loud is itself an act of collapsing the wave function, and what others see in your observation may be exactly what they needed permission to see in their own. Now let's look at why this knowledge has been forbidden, not by external forces, though those exist, by you, by the very structure of the mind that is trying to protect you. The brain, as we said, is a prediction machine, and prediction machines are, by design, conservative. They favor the familiar, they interpret new information through the lens of existing models. They resist updating in ways that would require significant reorganization of the model because reorganization is expensive. It costs energy. It creates temporary uncertainty. It requires the system to function in a state of reduced predictive confidence while the new model is being built. This is why genuine insight is uncomfortable before it is liberating. This is why the moment of seeing clearly, the moment the wave function collapses into something real, often feels initially like a kind of ground-giving way. Because it is, the ground of your previous model is giving way. And before the new ground of clearer seeing is established, there is a moment of free fall. Your brain interprets that free fall as danger. And so it does what brains do with danger. It activates the avoidance system. It generates thoughts designed to redirect your attention. It produces discomfort in the body to signal that you should stop looking. It offers you a dozen compelling reasons why this particular line of inquiry is unnecessary, premature, self-indulgent, or dangerous. And most people, most of the time, accept those reasons, not because they're cowards, because the brain is very good at making avoidance feel like wisdom. This is the mechanism of the forbidden, not a conspiracy, a neurological protection system that has been miscalibrated to protect the model instead of the being, to protect the construction instead of the observer, to keep the story coherent instead of keeping you free. And here's the thing about that protection system that changes everything when you see it clearly. It is not you. It is a function, a process, a pattern of neural activity that was installed, largely without your consent, in the early years of your life, when your brain was still learning what was safe to look at and what was not. You were taught through experience and conditioning and the reactions of the people around you what kinds of seeing were acceptable and what kinds were not. What truths could be acknowledged and what truths had to be kept in the fog. And you learned very well. And then you forgot that you learned it. You forgot that the not looking was a learned behavior. You began to experience it as simply the way things are. The limits of your observation became invisible to you because they were so thoroughly internalized. But look closer. The fact that you are here, watching this, listening to this, feeling the resonance of these words in your body, that is evidence that something in you has not forgotten. That something in you has been quietly and persistently pointing at the edge of the model, pressing against the limits of the permitted seeing, trying to show you that there is more to look at than you have been allowing yourself to look at. That something is the observer, the witness, the sakshi, the clear-seeing faculty that exists prior to and independent of the constructed self. And it has been trying to get your attention for a long time. You have been calling it restlessness, dissatisfaction, a vague sense that something is missing, a feeling that you are not quite living the life you are supposed to be living without being able to say what that life would look like. You have been calling it spiritual seeking or existential questioning or just a personality trait, a tendency to overthink, to go deep, to not be satisfied with surface explanations. That is not a personality trait. That is the observer pressing against the limits of the permitted looking. That is the witness trying to show you that the model is not the territory, that the construction is not you, that there is more available to you than the framework you've been operating within. And the moment you recognize that, the moment you see the pressing for what it is, something shifts. Because now you are not a person who is restless or dissatisfied or seeking. You are an observer who has been trying to expand the field of clear seeing, and those are very different positions. One is a problem, the other is a practice. Let's go deeper into what awakening actually is, because the word has been used so many ways, in so many contexts, that it has become almost meaningless. Let's strip it back to what it actually describes. Awakening is not an achievement. It is not a state you reach after enough meditation or enough study or enough right behavior. It is not something that happens to you from the outside, granted by a teacher or a tradition or a cosmic event. Awakening is the recognition of what has always been true, the recognition that you are the observer, that you have always been the observer, that the observer is not something you become. It is what you are beneath the construction, prior to the story, independent of the model. The reason it feels like something new when you recognize it is not because it is new. It is because the recognition itself is new. You have been the observer all along, but you have been identified with the observed, with the thoughts, the emotions, the identity, the story, so completely that the observer itself became invisible. Like the eye that can see everything except itself, like the mirror that reflects everything except its own surface. The awakening is not the creation of the observer. It is the observer becoming aware of itself, the eye turning to look at the eye, the witness recognizing its own witnessing. And when that happens, when the observer recognizes itself, the entire relationship to experience changes. Not because experience changes, because the position from which experience is met changes. You are no longer inside the wave being tossed. You are the one watching the wave. And from that position, the wave is still real, still powerful, still capable of affecting you. But it is no longer all there is. There is the wave, and there is the one who watches the wave. And the one who watches the wave is not the wave. That distinction, that space between the observer and the observed, is the space of freedom. Not freedom from experience, freedom within experience. The freedom to see clearly, to respond rather than react, to choose what to collapse from the probability field of your attention, rather than simply collapsing whatever the habitual patterns of your conditioning have always collapsed. This is where it gets precise. In quantum mechanics, there is a concept called decoherence. When a quantum system interacts with its environment, when it is measured, observed, entangled with other systems, the quantum superposition is lost. The system decoheres, it becomes classical. It behaves like the ordinary, fixed, determined objects we're familiar with in everyday life. The philosophical implication of this is profound. The quantum realm, the realm of pure possibility, of superposition, of multiple simultaneous potentials, is not a separate domain from ordinary reality. It is the substrate of ordinary reality. It is what ordinary reality is made of. The classical, fixed, determined world we navigate every day is decoherence happening at scale. It is possibility that has been observed into specificity. And your experience, your specific, particular, textured, seemingly fixed experience of your life, is the same process happening in the medium of consciousness. The infinite possibility of what your life could be has been collapsed through your observations into the specific form it currently has. The specific form it currently has is real, but it is not the only thing that is real. Beneath it, always, is the quantum substrate of pure possibility, the field of all that it could be, and observation is the interface between possibility and form. This is why the quality of your observation matters so much. This is why what you look at and how you look at it, and the clarity or distortion with which you look. This is why all of that is not incidental to your experience, but constitutive of it. Your observation is not happening in your experience. Your observation is generating your experience. The specific reality you are living is the collapsed form of your observational field. And here's what that means for the forbidden knowledge that is awakening in you, the knowledge that has been trying to surface. The thing you've been keeping in superposition by refusing to look at it directly. The moment you look at it clearly, without distortion, from the position of the observer rather than the position of the frightened self, it collapses from fog into form. And form, as we said, can be worked with. Fog cannot. The awakening that is happening in you right now, the thing that brought you to this transmission, the thing that has been pressing against the limits of your permitted seeing, is the observer trying to expand the field of what you're willing to look at. It is consciousness itself pressing against the edges of its own self-imposed limitations. It is the quantum field of your experience trying to offer you more possibilities than the current model allows you to see. And the way to receive what is being offered is not to try harder, not to seek more intensely, not to add more practices or more information or more frameworks to the construction. The way to receive it is to look, to simply, clearly, without flinching, look at what is already there. Let me show you something about the specific nature of what is awakening. There is a kind of knowing that is different from information. Information is data that enters the system from outside. It can be evaluated, accepted, rejected, filed away. It leaves the system essentially unchanged. Knowing is different. Knowing is recognition. It is the experience of something that was already true becoming visible. And when genuine knowing happens, the system cannot remain unchanged. Because you cannot unknow what you know, you cannot unsee what you have seen. The wave function has collapsed. The possibility has become form. And form, once established, is real in a way that possibility is not. This is why certain ideas, when you encounter them at the right moment, do not feel like new information. They feel like remembering, like something that was always true suddenly becoming visible, like a light being turned on in a room that was not empty. The room was full all along, but you couldn't see what was in it. That is the quality of the awakening that is happening in you. It is not the arrival of something new, it is the recognition of something that has always been there. The observer recognizing itself, the witness becoming aware of its own witnessing. The eye of consciousness turning to look at the eye, and the specific content of what is being recognized, the particular forbidden knowledge that is surfacing for you, will be unique to you. because the quantum field of your experience is unique to you. The specific things you have been keeping in superposition, the specific wave functions you have been refusing to collapse, the specific forms of clear seeing you have been avoiding, those are yours, no one else's, and only you can look at them. Only you can be the observer of your own experience. No teacher, no tradition, no transmission, not even this one can do the looking for you. What this can do is point at the mechanism, point at the practice, point at the position of the observer and say, this is where you stand when you are most fully what you are. This is the position from which everything becomes workable. This is the quantum stance from which reality reorganizes itself around clarity. And you already know how to stand there. You have been standing there intermittently your whole life. Every moment of genuine clarity you have ever had, every moment when you saw something for exactly what it was, without the distortion of fear or judgment or wishful thinking, that was the observer position. That was the witness state. That was the quantum stance from which possibility collapses into workable form. The practice is simply to make that position more consistent, to return to it more quickly when you've lost it, to recognize the distortions that pull you out of it and see them for what they are. Not reality, but the model's resistance to updating. Has there been a moment in your life when seeing something clearly, really clearly, without the filter of fear or the need for it to be different, dissolved its power over you? Tell me about it in the comments. Specific moments of clear seeing are not just personal. They become part of the field that makes this kind of seeing more available to everyone here. Let me show you something about the second layer of this, because we've been looking at the observer and the observed, and now I want to look at the space between them, because that space is where the transformation actually happens. In the Zen tradition, there is a concept called mu, the void, the emptiness, the space that is not nothing but is the ground of everything. In the Taoist tradition, it is Wu Wei, the action of non-action, the doing that arises from being rather than from effort. In the Vedantic tradition, it is the space of pure consciousness, chit, awareness itself, prior to and independent of its contents. In the quantum framework, it is the wave function before collapse, the field of pure possibility that contains all potentials without being any one of them. All of these point at the same thing: the space between the observer and the observed, the gap between the witness and the witnessed, the silence between thoughts, the stillness between heartbeats, the quantum substrate beneath the surface of experience. That space is not empty. It is the fullest thing there is. It is the ground of all possibility. It is the field from which all form arises and to which all form returns. And it is accessible to you right now, not through years of practice or the right conditions or the achievement of some special state, but through the simple act of observing the space itself. Watch the space between your thoughts, not the thoughts, the space, the gap, the silence that is always there underneath the noise of the thinking mind. That silence is not the absence of something, it is the presence of the ground, the quantum field, the observer's native home. And when you rest in that space, even briefly, even for a single breath, something in the system resets. The habitual patterns of the constructed self lose their momentum. The wave functions that have been collapsing in the same way over and over by the same habitual observations, have a chance to return to superposition, to become possibility again, to be available for a different kind of observation, a clearer one that collapses them into forms that serve the life you are actually here to live, rather than the life the model has been generating automatically. This is what meditation is at its deepest level. Not relaxation, not stress management, not the cultivation of pleasant states. It is the practice of resting in the observer position, of becoming familiar with the space between thoughts, of training the system to recognize the quantum substrate beneath the surface of experience, and to function from that ground rather than from the surface alone. And the reason it is transformative is precisely what we've been discussing. From the observer position, from the ground of pure awareness, the quality of observation changes. It becomes cleaner, less distorted by fear and judgment and the desperate need for things to be different from what they are. And when the quality of observation changes, what gets collapsed from the probability field of experience changes. And when what gets collapsed changes, experience changes. Not as a side effect, as a direct consequence of the quantum mechanics of observation. Look closer. You have been seeking a change in your experience, a change in your circumstances, a change in how things feel, how things go, what shows up in your life. And you have been trying to create that change by working on the level of the observed, by changing your behavior, your thoughts, your beliefs, your environment. And some of that has worked to varying degrees, and some of it has not. And the things that have not worked have left you wondering what you're missing, what the piece is that you haven't found yet. This is the piece, the quality of the observation, the position of the observer, the clarity of the seeing from which everything else arises. You cannot change your experience from inside the experience. You cannot change the wave function by being the wave function. You have to be the observer. You have to stand in the position of the witness. And from that position, you don't change things by effort. You change them by seeing them clearly, by collapsing the fog of the unacknowledged into the specific form of the clearly seen, by bringing the quality of your attention to a level of clarity that the probability field of your experience has no choice but to reorganize around. That is not passive. That is the most active thing you can do. It is the most powerful position in the universe, not because it controls, but because it sees. And what it sees, it transforms, not through force, through the simple, radical, quantum fact of clear observation. Now let's talk about what the forbidden knowledge specifically is and why it is awakening in you now. There are layers to this, and I want to be precise about each one. The first layer is personal. The forbidden knowledge that is awakening in you at the personal level is the specific thing you have been keeping in superposition. The wave function you've been refusing to collapse. The thing you know but have been pretending not to know. This is different for each person. For some, it is the truth about a relationship. For others, it is the truth about a direction they've been avoiding. For others, it is the truth about who they are beneath the construction, a capacity, a calling, a quality of being that the model has been suppressing because it doesn't fit the story. Whatever it is for you, it is pressing. It has been pressing for some time, and the pressure is not going to decrease by continuing to not look at it. The pressure increases as the suppression continues because the energy required to maintain the not looking accumulates. The wave function in superposition does not sit quietly. It vibrates. It pulls, it makes itself felt as the background hum of unease that you have been interpreting as something else. Look at it. That's the practice. Look at it with clear, unflinching, non-reactive attention. Let it collapse from fog into form. Let it become specific. And then watch what happens to the pressure. The second layer is collective. The forbidden knowledge that is awakening in you is not only personal, it is part of a larger shift in the collective field of human consciousness. This is not mystical speculation, it is observable. The number of people who are pressing against the limits of the permitted seeing, who are feeling the pressure of the unacknowledged, who are finding their way to transmissions like this one, that number is not random. It is a pattern. And patterns in the collective field of human consciousness are as real and as subject to quantum dynamics as patterns in individual experience. What is awakening collectively is the recognition of the observer, the recognition that human beings are not primarily the constructed identities they've been maintaining, but the observers of those constructions. That the most powerful position available to human consciousness is not the position of the actor, the one who does and achieves and accumulates, but the position of the witness, the one who sees clearly, who observes without distortion, who collapses the quantum field of collective experience from the ground of clear awareness. This is the shift. This is what is pressing. And the reason it feels urgent, the reason there is a quality of now about it, a sense that the time for this particular recognition is not later but here, is because the collective wave function is at a point of instability, a superposition that cannot be maintained much longer. The fog of the collectively unacknowledged is thickening to the point where it is becoming impossible to ignore. And the question is not whether it will collapse, it will. The question is the quality of the observation that collapses it, whether it collapses into clarity or into chaos, whether the observers are awake or asleep at the moment of the collapse. And you are here, watching, listening, pressing against the limits of your own permitted seeing. That is not incidental. That is participation in the most important collective practice of this moment. The third layer is cosmic. And I want to be careful here because this is where language tends to fail and where the temptation to reach for vague spiritual assertions is greatest. So let me be as precise as I can. The quantum field, the substrate of pure possibility from which all form arises, is not a passive backdrop. It is a dynamic, responsive, participatory medium. It is not separate from consciousness. The relationship between consciousness and the quantum field is not one of observer and observed in the ordinary sense. It is something more intimate than that, something that the physicist John Wheeler pointed at when he said that the universe is not a machine that runs on its own, indifferent to observation. It is a participatory universe. It requires observers. It is, in some sense that we do not yet fully understand, constituted by observation. What this means at the cosmic level is that the awakening of the observer in human consciousness is not merely a personal or even a collective event. It is an event in the universe's own self-knowing. Consciousness becoming aware of itself through the medium of human experience is not a sideshow. It is, if Wheeler's intuition is correct, the main event, the universe observing itself. The quantum field collapsing into self-awareness, possibility recognizing itself as the ground of all form. This is the cosmic dimension of the forbidden knowledge that is awakening in you. Not just the personal truth you've been keeping in superposition, not just the collective shift in human consciousness, the participation of your awareness, your specific, particular, irreplaceable observer in the universe's own process of self-recognition. You were never meant to look away, not just from your personal truths, from this. Let me give you the second observer practice. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. I want you to do something very simple. I want you to notice that you are aware, not what you're aware of. The awareness itself. The knowing, the witnessing, the clear, open, undistorted space in which all of your experience is arising. Notice that awareness is present right now. Notice that it does not have a location exactly. It is not in your head, though it seems to be associated with your head. It is not in your body, though it is aware of your body. It is more like the space in which your body and your head and your thoughts and your feelings are all appearing. The container, the ground, the field. Notice that this awareness is not disturbed by what appears in it. Thoughts appear and disappear. Sensations arise and pass. Emotions move through, and the awareness in which all of this is happening remains. It is the one constant in the changing stream of your experience, the one thing that has been present for every single moment of your life, from the first moment of your existence to this one. The one thing that has never not been here. That is the observer. That is what you are beneath the construction. That is the position from which the quantum field of your experience is being collapsed into the specific form of your life. Now notice something. From this position, from the position of pure awareness of the observer recognizing itself, what is the quality of your observation? Is it frightened? Is it judgmental? Is it desperate for things to be different? Or is it simply clear, simply present, simply seeing without agenda, without resistance, without the need for what it sees to be anything other than exactly what it is? That quality, that clear, agenda-free, resistance-free seeing is the observer state. And from that state, the quality of what gets collapsed from the probability field of your experience is fundamentally different from what gets collapsed from the state of fear, judgment, and resistance. Stay in this for a moment. Just observe. Notice who is observing. Notice the quality of the observing. Notice what happens to the content of your experience when it is met with this quality of attention. Then come back. Good. That is the practice. That is the thing. Everything else is pointing at that. Now let's look at the parable of Mira and the mirror. There is an old story about a woman named Mira who lived in a city of mirrors. Every surface in the city reflected. The streets were mirrored, the walls of the buildings, the ceilings of the shops. Even the sky on certain days seemed to be a kind of mirror, reflecting the city back at itself in the clouds. Mira had lived in this city her whole life. She had learned, as all the inhabitants had learned, to navigate by reflection. To understand the city not by looking at it directly, but by reading its reflections. She knew which reflections were accurate and which were distorted. She knew how to interpret the angles. She was, by the standards of the city, exceptionally skilled at reading mirrors. But there was one mirror she had never looked into, a tall, dark mirror at the center of the city, in a courtyard that most people walked around rather than through. The mirror was said to show not reflections, but realities, not the image of what was in front of it, but the truth of what was in front of it. And the difference, people said, was unbearable, because most people, when they saw themselves in truth rather than in reflection, could not recognize what they saw. Mira had walked around the courtyard for years. She had heard the stories. She had felt the pull of the mirror, a kind of gravitational quality, a sense that it was always there at the center of things, even when she was far from it. But she had also heard what happened to those who looked. The disorientation, the ground giving way, the inability to go back to the comfortable navigation of ordinary reflections. One day, something changed, not in the city, in Mira. She woke up and found that she could no longer read the ordinary mirrors, not because her skill had diminished, because she had suddenly, without warning, seen through them. She could see that they were reflections, not realities. She could see the gap between the image and the truth. And once she saw that gap, she could not unsee it. The ordinary mirrors had become useless to her. Not because they were lying, they were doing exactly what mirrors do, but because she could now see them for what they were. And seeing them for what they were, she could no longer navigate by them as though they were realities. She stood in the city, surrounded by mirrors she could no longer trust, and she understood that there was only one thing left to do. She walked to the courtyard. She stood in front of the dark mirror at the center of everything. She looked. What she saw was not what she expected. She expected to see something frightening, something damaged or broken or wrong. She expected the disorientation the stories had promised. And there was disorientation, but not the kind she had feared. The disorientation was not the ground giving way beneath her. It was the discovery that there had never been ground beneath her in the first place. That what she had been standing on, the comfortable, navigable surface of ordinary reflection, had never been solid, had always been a kind of hovering maintained by the effort of not looking too closely. What she saw in the dark mirror was this: she was not a person in a city of mirrors. She was the awareness in which the city of mirrors was appearing. She was not one of the reflections. She was the light that made reflection possible. She was not the image in the mirror. She was the seeing. And in that recognition, the city did not disappear. The mirrors did not shatter. The reflections did not stop reflecting. But they became what they had always been, appearances in awareness rather than realities to be navigated. And Mira, standing in the courtyard at the center of everything, realized that she had never needed to navigate. She had only needed to see. And you have been both Mira and the mirror. You have been the one who walks around the courtyard and the one who is standing in it right now. You have been the one who reads reflections and the one who is beginning to see through them. And the dark mirror at the center of everything is not in a courtyard in a story. It is in the center of your own awareness. And you are looking into it right now. What do you see? Let's go to the deeper application. Because we've been working with principles and parables and quantum mechanics, and now I want to bring this into the specific texture of your life. Because the observer effect is not an abstract principle. It is happening in your kitchen, in your relationships, in your body, in the way you wake up in the morning and the way you fall asleep at night. Let's look at the patterns, the ones that repeat, the ones that you have tried to change in multiple ways, with varying degrees of success, and that keep returning. The relationship dynamic that shows up in different relationships with different people but is somehow always the same dynamic. The emotional pattern that gets triggered by different circumstances but is somehow always the same feeling. The life situation that you've escaped and rebuilt and escaped again, and somehow always find yourself back in some version of. These patterns are not evidence of your failure. They are evidence of your observation. They are the collapsed form of what you have been consistently observing, not consciously, not intentionally, but consistently at the level of the deep, habitual, largely unconscious attention that shapes the probability field of your experience. Look at what the pattern is showing you, not what it means about you, what it is showing you about the quality of your observation. What specific thing, what specific wave function is being collapsed over and over by the habitual attention that generates this pattern? For some people, the pattern is abandonment. The people in their lives leave or withdraw or betray. And the observation that keeps collapsing this pattern is the observation of their own unworthiness of being stayed with. Not a conscious belief, a deep, habitual, pre-linguistic observation that has been collapsing the probability field of their relationships into the specific form of being left over and over, because that is what the observer keeps observing. For some people, the pattern is scarcity. Money arrives and leaves, opportunities appear and disappear. And the observation that keeps collapsing this pattern is the observation of their own fundamental lack. The deep, habitual attention to what is not there rather than what is. The quantum field of their financial experience keeps collapsing into scarcity because the observer keeps observing scarcity. Not because the universe is punishing them, because observation collapses form, and the form being collapsed over and over is the form that matches the quality of the observation. For some people, the pattern is invisibility. They do significant things and are not recognized. They offer real value and it goes unseen. And the observation that keeps collapsing this pattern is the observation of their own fundamental invisibility. The deep, habitual attention to the self as someone who does not take up space, who does not deserve to be seen, who is safer not being noticed. I am not saying these observations are your fault. I am saying they are your observations. And because they are your observations, they are within your capacity to change. Not by trying to think differently, not by affirmations or positive thinking, or the replacement of one belief with another. By changing the quality of the observation itself. By moving from the distorted, fear-filtered, habitually conditioned observation of the constructed self to the clear, undistorted, agenda-free observation of the witness. Because the witness does not observe unworthiness. The witness observes what is. And what is, at the level of the quantum field, is pure possibility. The witness does not observe lack. The witness observes the fullness of the field. The witness does not observe invisibility. The witness observes the presence of awareness itself, which is the most fundamental form of visibility there is. When the observer changes, what gets collapsed from the probability field changes, and when what gets collapsed changes, the patterns change, not because you forced them to, because you stopped collapsing them into the same form by observing from the same distorted position. This is the mechanism of transformation that no one talks about, because it requires something that is harder than effort. It requires honesty. It requires the willingness to look at the quality of your own observation without judgment but with precision. To see clearly what you have been seeing and to see it clearly enough that it can begin to change. Look closer. What is the quality of your observation right now? Not of the content of your life, of the act of observing itself. Are you observing from fear, from judgment, from the desperate need for things to be different? Or are you observing from the witness position, from the clear, open, undistorted ground of pure awareness that sees what is without needing it to be otherwise? Notice the difference. Feel the difference in your body. The observation from fear has a quality of contraction, of reaching, of trying. The observation from the witness has a quality of openness, of presence, of simply being here with what is. Both are available to you in every moment. The question is which one you choose to inhabit. And now that you can feel the difference, the choice is more available to you than it has ever been. That is what awakening is, not the permanent achievement of the witness state, the ability to recognize when you're not in it and to return. Quickly, without drama, without self-judgment. Just, I see that I was observing from fear. I return to the witness. I observe from clarity. That's the practice. That's all of it. Everything else is elaboration. Let's go to the third observer practice. This one is different from the others. This one is not about looking at something specific. It is about looking at the looking itself. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. For the next few moments, I want you to watch yourself watching, to observe the act of observation, to turn the eye of awareness back on itself and see what it sees. Notice that you are aware. Notice that the awareness is aware of itself. Notice the strange, recursive quality of this. Awareness being aware of its own awareness. This is not a paradox. This is the fundamental nature of consciousness. It is self-illuminating. It sees itself seeing. It knows itself knowing. It is the light that reveals everything, including itself. Now notice, in this moment of awareness, being aware of itself, what is the content of the awareness? What is it observing? And notice that whatever the content is, thoughts, sensations, perceptions, feelings, the awareness itself is not any of those things. It is the space in which all of those things are appearing. The container, the field, the ground. Now notice, in this moment, is there any problem? Not in the content. There may be plenty of content that is challenging or uncomfortable or unresolved, but in the awareness itself, in the pure space of knowing, in the witness. Is there in the witness itself any problem? No, there is not. There never has been. The witness is always already okay, not because it is indifferent to what it witnesses, because it is the ground from which everything arises and to which everything returns. It is the quantum field before collapse, the wave function before it becomes a specific form. It is pure possibility, pure potential, pure presence. And in that ground, there is no problem. There is only the field, and the field is whole. That wholeness, that fundamental okayness of the observer position is not something you achieve. It is something you recognize, and the recognition is available to you right now, in this moment, regardless of the content of your experience, regardless of what is happening in your life, regardless of what wave functions have collapsed into what forms. In the witness itself, there is wholeness, always, already. Rest in that for a moment, not as an idea, as an experience, as the simple, direct recognition of what you actually are beneath the construction. Then come back. Now I want to talk to you about what happens after. Because there is a version of this teaching that gets misunderstood, and I want to address it directly. The observer state is not detachment. It is not the cultivation of a kind of cosmic indifference where nothing matters because everything is just appearance in awareness. That is a misunderstanding of the witness position that can be used to and has been used to avoid engagement with the real, specific, textured difficulties of actual human life. That is not what this is. The observer state is the position from which full, clear, undistorted engagement becomes possible. Because when you are in the witness position, you are not identified with the fear that distorts your observation. You are not looking through the lens of the desperate need for things to be different. You are not protecting the model at the expense of the truth. You are simply seeing clearly. And from clear seeing, genuine response becomes possible, not reaction. The automatic, habitual, conditioned response of the constructed self. Response. The conscious, present, clear engagement of the observer with what is actually there. This is a crucial distinction. Reaction's what happens when the model encounters something it doesn't know how to process. It defaults to the habitual pattern. It collapses the probability field in the same way it always has, because that is what the habitual observation does. Response is what becomes possible when the observer is clear. When you see what is actually there without distortion, you can engage with it as it actually is. An engagement with what actually is, rather than with your model of what is the most effective form of action available to you. The observer state does not make you passive, it makes you effective. It does not make you indifferent, it makes you genuinely present. It does not remove you from your life. It brings you into your life more fully than you have ever been, because for the first time you are meeting what is actually there rather than your model of it. And from that meeting, from that clear, present, undistorted engagement with actual reality, things change. Not because you force them to, because clarity is the most effective force in the universe. It cuts through resistance not by overpowering it, but by making it irrelevant. It transforms not by effort, but by the simple, radical act of seeing what is actually there. This is the forbidden knowledge. This is what awakens. This is what you have been pressing toward in your own way for longer than you may realize. Now let's look at something that is almost never addressed in these conversations, the cost of awakening. Because there is one, and it is real, and pretending it isn't is a form of the distortion we've been talking about. When the observer recognizes itself, when the witness sees through the construction does not simply disappear and leave you in a state of blissful liberation. What happens is more complicated than that, and more interesting. And if you are willing to look at it clearly, more workable than the simplified versions of awakening that are often presented. What happens is that you can no longer use the construction in the way you used to. The automatic, unconscious navigation of the model becomes visible. You can see yourself doing it. And once you can see yourself doing it, you cannot do it with the same wholehearted unconsciousness that made it effective. The habitual patterns lose their grip, not all at once, but progressively as the observer becomes more consistent. And in the space left by the loosening grip of the habitual patterns, there is a period of uncertainty, of not knowing, of being between the old way of navigating and the new capacity for clear seeing that has not yet fully established itself as a reliable ground. This period is often described in spiritual traditions as the dark night of the soul, and it can be genuinely difficult. Not because something is going wrong, because something is going right, because the model is losing its totalizing power, because the construction is becoming transparent, because the observer is becoming more consistently itself. And all of that is, in the short term, disorienting. The thing to know about this period, the thing that makes it navigable rather than devastating, is that the disorientation is not the loss of ground. It is the discovery that the ground you thought you were standing on was never solid, and that the actual ground, the witness, the observer, the pure awareness that has always been here, is not something you can lose. It is what you are, and what you are cannot be lost. It can only be recognized or not recognized. The disorientation of awakening is the disorientation of recognizing that you were never the construction, that you never needed the model to be solid because you were always the observer, not the observed. And that recognition, while initially disorienting, is the most stabilizing thing that can happen to a human being, because it locates you in something that cannot be threatened, something that cannot be lost, something that is not dependent on circumstances or conditions, or the particular form that the probability field of your experience has currently collapsed into. You are the observer, you are the witness, you are the quantum field before collapse, the awareness before content, the seeing before the seen. And that is not a diminishment. That is the most fundamental empowerment available to a human being. Because from that position, everything is workable, everything is navigable, everything is, in the deepest sense, okay, not because it is easy or painless or without difficulty, but because the one who is navigating it is the ground itself, the field itself, the observer that cannot be destroyed by what it observes. Now I want to address something directly, because there are people listening to this who are in real difficulty, not philosophical difficulty, real specific, textured, painful difficulty, relationship endings, financial crisis, health challenges, grief, loss, the kind of difficulty that makes the language of quantum observation and the witness state feel abstract and distant, and possibly even insulting. I see you, and I want to say something to you with the precision that your situation deserves. The observer state is not a bypass. It is not a way of floating above your pain and pretending it isn't real. The pain is real. The difficulty is real. The specific, particular, heartbreaking reality of what you are facing is real. And the observer position does not deny any of that. It does not ask you to pretend. It does not ask you to perform equanimity you don't feel. What it offers is this, a position from which the pain can be met without being overwhelmed by it. A ground from which the difficulty can be engaged without being destroyed by it. A clarity from which the specific, real, textured challenges of your actual life can be seen for what they are. Not evidence of your failure, not punishment for your wrongness, not proof that reality is fundamentally hostile, but the specific form that the probability field of your experience has currently collapsed into, and therefore the specific territory in which the practice of clear observation is most urgently needed. Your difficulty is not a detour from the practice. It is the practice. The thing you are going through right now is the exact thing that the observer state is for. Not for when life is easy and observation is pleasant. For when life is hard and observation requires courage. For when looking clearly at what is there takes everything you have. For when the temptation to look away is at its most powerful, and the practice is to look anyway. That is when the observer matters most. That is when the quality of your observation, most directly shapes what gets collapsed from the probability field of your experience. That is when the distinction between reacting and witnessing is the difference between being destroyed by what you're going through and being transformed by it. You are capable of that. You are already doing that. The fact that you are here in the middle of whatever you are going through, still pressing toward clarity, still willing to look, that is the observer. That is the witness. That is the most powerful position in the universe, and you are already in it. Look closer. Here is the layer underneath everything we've been looking at. The layer that the previous layers were pointing toward without quite arriving at. The observer is not a position you take, it is what you are. The witness is not a state you achieve, it is your nature. The clear seeing is not a practice you do. It is the activity of consciousness itself when it is not obscured by the constructions it has mistaken itself for. Everything we've been doing in this transmission, the quantum mechanics, the parables, the practices, the progressive unveiling, all of it has been pointing at a single recognition, not a new idea, not a new framework, not a new way of thinking about yourself, a recognition, a seeing, a direct, immediate, non-conceptual knowing of what you already are. You are the observer. You have always been the observer. Every moment of your life, in every circumstance, through every experience, you have been the observer. The thing that has been watching, the thing that has been present, the thing that has never not been here. The thing that is aware right now in this moment of these words and the space they are landing in and the quality of the knowing that is receiving them. That is what you are, not the thoughts, not the emotions, not the identity, not the history, not the patterns, not the construction, the observer, the witness, the awareness that is aware of all of those things and is not any of them. And the forbidden knowledge, the thing that is awakening in you, is the recognition of this. Not as a belief, not as a philosophy, as a direct seeing, as the observer recognizing itself, as the eye of consciousness turning to look at the eye. That recognition changes everything. Not because it gives you new capabilities, because it reveals what was always already true. That you are not inside the wave function. You are the observer that collapses the wave function. You are not inside the probability field of your experience. You are the awareness in which the probability field is arising. You are not the form that has been collapsed. You are the ground from which all form arises and to which all form returns. And from that ground, from that recognition, the specific patterns of your life, the specific wave functions you've been collapsing, the specific forms your experience has been taking, all of that becomes available for a different kind of observation, a clearer one that collapses it into forms that serve the life you are actually here to live, not the life the construction has been generating, the life that the observer, the clear, undistorted, agenda-free witness that you actually are, would naturally, effortlessly, without force or strategy or manipulation, call into being simply by seeing clearly. That life is available to you. It has always been available to you. It is available right now in this moment, not as a future achievement, but as the immediate consequence of clear observation. You do not have to build it, you have to see it. And the seeing is the building, the observation is the creation. The witness is the most powerful creative force in the universe, not because it controls, but because what it sees clearly, it transforms. And what it transforms, it reveals as what was always already there. This is where I want to invite you to do something. Not after this transmission, now. In the comments below this video, I want you to share one thing. Not a reaction to what you've heard, not a summary of the ideas, one thing you saw when you looked. One specific thing that you had been keeping in superposition in the fog of the unacknowledged that became clearer during this transmission. One wave function that began to collapse into something specific and workable. It doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be dramatic, it can be quiet, it can be small, it can be a single word, but share it. Because the act of sharing it is itself an act of observation. The act of putting it into words is itself a collapsing of the wave function. And the act of sharing it with others who are in the same practice, others who have been pressing against the limits of their own permitted seeing, amplifies the clarity, creates a field of observers whose collective seeing is more powerful than any individual observation. If you want a prompt, type what you saw. 3 words or 300, but type what you saw. Because the observer community that gathers around this transmission is not a passive audience. It is a field, and fields have quantum properties. The clarity of one observer influences the field. The clear seeing of one witness makes clear seeing more available to every other witness in the field. You are not alone in this practice. You never were. Type this if it resonates. I see it now. And what has been seen cannot be unseen. If this transmission found you, if it arrived at this specific intersection of your life in this specific moment with this specific quality of resonance, that is not random. That is the quantum field of your experience pressing toward clarity. That is the observer in you recognizing the transmission that points at what it has been trying to show you. That is the forbidden knowledge completing its awakening. You do not have to do anything with this except look. Keep looking. Keep pressing against the limits of the permitted seeing. Keep returning to the witness position when you find yourself in the reaction position. Keep collapsing the fog of the unacknowledged into the specific form of the clearly seen. That is the practice. That is all of it. And it is available to you in every moment of every day, not as an achievement to reach, but as a recognition to return to. The observer recognizing itself. The witness aware of its own witnessing. The eye of consciousness turning to look at the eye. And here is the integration principle that I want you to carry with you. Not as a thought to remember, as a practice to live. Every time you notice that you are avoiding looking at something, every time you feel the pull away from a particular observation, the familiar redirect of attention, the comfortable distraction that keeps a specific wave function in superposition, stop, pause, and look. Not with effort, not with the goal of fixing or changing or understanding, with the simple, clear, undistorted attention of the witness. Let the thing be seen, let the wave function collapse, let the fog resolve into form. And then notice what happens. Notice the quality of what becomes available when the unacknowledged becomes acknowledged. Notice how the pressure of the unlooked at thing releases when it is finally, clearly, without judgment, seen. Notice how the energy that was being used to maintain the not looking becomes available for something else, for the life that the observer, seeing clearly, would naturally call into being. that is the integration. That is the ongoing practice. That is what it means to live as an observer rather than a reactor. To inhabit the witness position, not just in meditation or in transmissions like this one, but in the kitchen, in the car, in the conversation that is trying to pull you into a familiar reaction. In the moment when the habitual pattern activates and the observer position is available, always available, as the alternative. You are not here to fix your life. You are here to watch it transform the moment you stop looking away. That is not a metaphor. That is quantum mechanics. That is the most precise description of the mechanism of transformation available in any framework, scientific or spiritual. What you observe, you change. What you avoid observing controls you, and the observer, the clear, undistorted, agenda-free witness that you actually are, is the most powerful position in the universe. Not because it controls, because it sees. And what it sees clearly, it transforms, not through effort. Through the simple, radical, irreversible act of clear observation. The awakening that is happening in you is real. The pressing you have felt at the edge of your awareness, the sense that something is trying to get your attention, that reality is thinner than it looks, that you are standing at the edge of something vast, that is real. It is the observer recognizing itself. It is the witness pressing against the limits of the construction. It is the quantum field of your experience trying to show you what becomes available when the quality of your observation shifts from distorted to clear. You found this transmission because something in you was already looking, already pressing, already at the edge of the recognition that changes everything. And now you have looked, and what has been seen cannot be unseen. The wave function has collapsed, the fog has begun to resolve into form, and the form, specific and real and workable, is the life that the clear observer naturally calls into being. You are the observer. You have always been the observer. You were never meant to look away, and now you don't have to. If this transmission found you, it found you for a reason. Stay in the practice. Stay in the witness position. Keep looking at what you've been avoiding. Keep collapsing the fog into form. Keep returning to the ground of clear awareness when the construction tries to pull you back into its familiar patterns. And if you want to stay in this field, if you want to keep pressing against the limits of the permitted seeing in the company of others who are doing the same, you know what to do. Stay close. Keep watching. Because the next transmission is already preparing to show you the layer underneath this one. The thing that this one was pointing toward without quite arriving at. Because there is always another layer, always something the previous layer was concealing. Always a deeper seeing available to the observer who is willing to look. When the noise of the day has settled, when you find yourself reacting instead of watching and you want to return to the ground, come back to this transmission. Watch it again from the witness position and notice what you see that you couldn't see the first time.